I have been focused on remote instruction for several years prior to COVID, but getting to be strong on the online instruction wasn't easy for me. It didn't happen overnight, not by a long shot. As someone who loved teaching in person, it was really hard for me to get used to teaching online. Nothing beats face-to-face instruction, seeing the understanding or the confusion on people's faces or how a joke landed, knowing immediately if I have people's attention, and of course, being able to throw things at people. I missed all of that. So over time, I got better at it. And I found techniques for checking for understanding and establishing a code of conduct and maybe throwing things at people without cracking my screen or getting that idea across. While it can be challenging and it doesn't replace face-to-face instruction, remote can solve a lot of problems and it offers its own benefits too. So I went to school for instructional design and started researching the topic to understand the principles of connection, social learning, motivation, and attention. And I often made the case for remote work and instruction prior to COVID, but in many cases it took COVID for organizations to take on the challenge of remote instruction out of necessity. And as my kids spent much of 2020 working from home, and I heard other parents complaining about how bad remote learning is by definition, it really frustrated me because I know it has so much more potential if people are willing to think differently. It doesn't have to be bad, really, I promise. So knowing my feelings about remote instruction, my sister texted me this graphic from CASE, the Curriculum for Agricultural Scientific Education, and it had an immediate impact on me. The visionaries in this graphic are proof positive that incredible learning can happen remotely. Each of these men were natural-born teachers and had a magic all their own. They didn't have a chat feature. They couldn't poll their participants. They couldn't interact with their learners at all. And yet they taught and inspired. And I think they each had some secret sauce that was rooted in instructional design theories that we could use today in the world of the digital workplace and in remote learning. This webinar will explore each TV show host's / teacher and the instructional design theories at play and how to apply these to workplace learning. Today, we will look into the great teachers who taught from inside the box, but thought outside it. So let's start at the top with my all-time favorite children's teacher, Mr. Rogers. I was mesmerized by him as a child, and I remember feeling like he was always talking directly to me. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood ran from 1968 to 2001, one of the longest running children's series on PBS. Mr. Rogers spoke directly to children, validating their feelings and having them name, face, and understand areas of emotional drama. Many have written about the lessons adults can take from his teaching, from pedagogy and HR to leadership. So who remembers any of the characters from the Land of Make-Believe? Do I have any people who grew up with him in the 70s, maybe with me? Anyone remember? You want to throw out the name of anybody from the Land of Make-Believe?
The King.
Yay, yes, King Friday.
Yep.
And Henrietta Pussycat, and X the Owl, and of course, Lady Elaine Fairchild. Mr. Rogers would tell a story depicting an interpersonal conflict in the Land of Make-Believe. For example, perhaps King Friday might want to play with another character like Henrietta Pussycat, but she might be too busy. Mr. Rogers would then turn to the camera and speak directly to the children, asking them if they ever felt like someone was too busy for them. Then they would be invited to consider why this might be so, and he would make offerings and of potential answers. He would help them name their feelings and let them know that those are common and valid. He would invite them to come up with their own solutions. Mr. Rogers' methods are asking learners questions, listening to the learner, and letting them construct their own meaning by making connections between new ideas and past experiences. Mr. Rogers' style is founded in constructivism. In education, this school of thought recognizes learners construct understanding and knowledge by integrating new ideas with what they already know. Constructivism can be traced back to the educational psychology work of Jean Piaget and identified with his theory of cognitive development. It is also strongly associated with the work of John Dewey and has been greatly influential in modern day education. The learner-centered approach takes constructivism into practice by letting the learner navigate their own learning. In a true learner-centered curriculum, the learner charts the topics and assesses their own learning as they go. Mr. Rogers' content was deep and meaningful and changed the perspectives of children, giving them emotional coping tools. This also is reminiscent of transformational learning, this process of deep, constructive, meaningful learning that goes beyond the simple knowledge acquisition, supports critical thought, allowing learners to consciously make meaning of their lives. And transformational learning is based in the work of Jack Mesereau in the 70s. So what do you think this looks like in the workplace? Well, it starts with asking open-ended questions, and this can be done in instructor-led training, or you can have discussion boards and blogs for asynchronous learning. This will activate prior knowledge and allow the learner to draw upon their own experiences, allowing them to construct their own learning by connecting back to their own experience. In a true learner-centered approach, the learner can plan their own learning. And to the extent you can on TV, Mr. Rogers allowed the learner to direct the learning by taking ownership of what's learned. The children really were in control. The stories he presented were offerings. Have your learners create learning for their own professional development, especially where attitudes like soft skills are concerned. Mr. Rogers is the person you want building leadership training programs and providing you with executive coaching. Can you imagine the empathetic and mindful leaders that Mr. Rogers' leadership program would develop? Now imagine Fred Rogers on a Zoom. Can you imagine? Do you think his gaze is askew? Is he looking at a second monitor or a cell phone? Is he in a weird or off-putting angle or in darkness? No way. Mr. Rogers would be dead center and looking right at you through the camera. He would be 100% present. And there would be no way for learners to not be engaged because the attention would be on them, not just the content. To facilitate like Mr. Rogers, be present, slow down. Mr. Rogers was known to speak very slowly. And I don't think it's possible to imagine him just walking through slides and not being connected to people. Listen and empathize. Listen to what they say to those answers when they volunteer them. Let the learners guide the conversations. A learner-centered approach reflects the differences and the unique wisdom in learners. Premiering in November of 2019, the film, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, follows the true story of the real-life friendship between Fred Rogers and Tom Junod. To learn more about Mr. Rogers, I highly recommend this movie. It's directed by Marielle Heller and acted brilliantly by Tom Hanks. I also recommend Morgan Neville's 2018 Won't You Be My Neighbor, the critically acclaimed documentary that explores his legacy. There's also a couple of other documentaries if you're interested. Mr. Rogers and Me is a great one, and the PBS documentary, Mr. Rogers, It's You I Like. They're both streaming on Prime Video. So does anyone remember his parting song? Anybody out there brave enough to want to sing it with me? Come on, no? I'll be back when the day is new and I'll have more ideas for you. And you'll have things you want to talk about, and I will too. I can't imagine a more learner-centered little jingle. It also connects to the idea that you'll have ideas that you'll want to talk about. So I watched Mr. Rogers as a child of the 70s, and his show ran through the 80s. If we stay tuned to PBS, we can catch another show that overlapped with his. This is Bob Ross's Joy of Painting, and it aired on PBS from 1983 to 1994. In this show, Bob Ross demonstrated the creation of a complete landscape in 30 minutes. It was amazing to see. I don't know if we have any Joy of Painting fans here today, if anyone wants to shout out. Bonus points if anyone knows this. What? Somebody?
Oh, so of course. Oh, yeah.
Good. Does anyone know for bonus points the oil painting show that predated Bob Ross on PBS. Anybody? The Magic of Oil Painting by Bill Alexander. And actually, Bob was Bill's protege. Kind of interesting to look into that relationship. So Bob Ross taught specific techniques for landscape painting by showing how to make key elements such as sky, trees, and clouds. Learning by watching others is observational learning. It's a subset of social learning theory that describes learning from watching and mimicking the behaviors of others. Observational learning is common with children as they tend to naturally copy adults. However, observational learning can be used in the workplace to teach on-the-job skills. Workplace techniques like shadowing, which is a practice of getting new employees up to speed in specific job tasks by having them follow more experienced employees and watching them perform those tasks. One example of observational learning. Another common one is simulations, watching simulations, screen simulations, just-in-time training, also observational learning. Does anyone remember the kind of clouds and trees that Bob Ross painted? Anybody?
Happy little trees.
Yes, happy clouds and happy trees, but there were also happy accidents. Bob Ross coined the term happy accidents, and they're incredibly important to learning. You need to be able to feel safe and experiment to learn. Learning environment should be a low-risk place where there are no real consequences for mistakes, other than learning that, hey, that didn't work. Bob Ross was able to take it to the next level by turning mistakes into opportunities. If you can do that, you're an instructional superhero. Another reason Bob Ross was so consistent was because he was known for his impeccable planning of the show, down to the word, and making 3 copies of each painting for each show. Bob Ross used prototyping to ensure excellence in his results. There were 403 episodes of The Joy of Painting, and Bob Ross was known to have made 3 prototypes for each painting. Anyone fast with math? That's 1,209 Bob Ross paintings just for the series. In a 1991 interview with the New York Times, Ross claimed that he made over 30,000 paintings. Take that in, 30,000 paintings since he was an 18-year-old stationed in Alaska with the Air Force. When Bob Ross died of lymphoma in 1995, most of his paintings either ended up in the hands of charity or with PBS. So what about the workplace? What does Bob Ross have to offer us in the workplace? Well, he's the guy I want designing our just-in-time learning. First of all, I'll know that each nugget will be well prototyped and tested, but also he had a streamlined way of designing things on a whole oil painting in 30 minutes. Think about that. I don't know if anyone who does remember the show, it was really amazing to see that come together. His process was streamlined and efficient. Planning, prepping, and storyboarding are all key factors to quality instructional design. Bob Ross could bang out an entire 13-episode season of The Joy of Painting in just over 2 days. He was incredibly efficient and systematic in how he built his assets, and he could create an oil painting faster than most people can do a voiceover for an e-learn. It helps to prototype a design that will be easy to create, but also think about how you're going to edit and update your assets as things change. So you want to keep your development time down so that you can keep your content up to date. I also know that Bob's just-in-time videos and nuggets would be well chunked. Chunking is a way of breaking content into key pieces and ordering them so that they are more digestible to the learner. The learning for each chunk can be tested before building on it. So you can understand that somebody knows something before you start heaping on more learning on top of that. That's part of why chunking is really important in instructional design. Bob Ross started with sky, and then he added puffy white clouds before adding the happy little trees one at a time. Instructional designers should perform a detailed task analysis and determine the smallest units of learning and order them correctly. You should ensure that the asks of your learners are simple and focused on specific learning objectives. As a master of observational learning, Bob is the ideal person to create simulations and record screen captures in the workplace for just-in-time nuggets. Not to mention that there's an artistry to videos and the eLearn wraparounds that go around them, so his visual skills would come in handy. And practice. You need to practice things. The small chunks need to be practiced. Practice is at the root of all skills acquisition. And I have a quote from Bob Ross on this. Talent is a pursued interest. Anything that you're willing to practice, you can do. That's who I want teaching me, by the way, someone with that attitude. But also, you need to practice. Bob definitely gets the prize for practice. His methods were repetitive and consistent. I don't know if any fans remember some of his favorite colors. Does anyone remember his palette? Anyone big Bob Ross fan? You saw the same palette every week, every episode. Alizarin crimson, titanium white, Prussian blue, sap green, Van Dyke brown. It was the same. Bob kept things simple and consistent. He kept the palette the same. He stuck with the wet-on-wet technique that didn't spring many new techniques on the learners, which allowed them to keep practicing that same skill until they achieved mastery. This connects to providing a safe learning environment too. Part of this is ensuring that learners have a safe place to make happy accidents, or just having the chance to practice in a consequence-free zone. Examples could be role-playing for management training, or scenario-based learning for sales, or a digital sandbox for learning new software, or a learning cell with scrap material in the manufacturing environment. You get the idea. So now we're in an online class with Bob. And how do you think he facilitates? Anybody? Well, he is prepared and meticulous. Bob Ross made everything look spontaneous and effortless, but this took an incredible amount of planning and effort. You would never know this, but he was known to plan and rehearse every line, every word of that show. Also, he was a soothing facilitator. Watching him show us how to create those happy clouds in his calm yet upbeat way was deeply satisfying. Some have even described this strangely soothing style as an early example of ASMR. For those who haven't heard of ASMR, or autonomous sensory meridian response, it's a subjective experience of low-grade euphoria characterized by positive feelings and a tingling sensation. It's most commonly triggered with specific auditory or visual stimuli. Over 13 million videos aimed at inducing ASMR have been published on YouTube. Now, I am not sure about the validity of ASMR, but some have described a similar experience induced by Bob Ross, and that I can understand. They've cited his show as being an early example of ASMR movement. Needless to say, his style was soothing and calm, yet upbeat, and it definitely made people feel relaxed and happy. We may not aspire to any form of euphoria or tingling from our online classes, but it's good to know that you don't have to be forcefully engaging to elicit a strong learner response. Fun fact, before Bob Ross became a painter, he spent 20 years in the United States Air Force and retired with the rank of Master Sergeant. Quoting him, "I was the guy who makes you scrub the latrine, the guy who makes you make your bed, the guy who screams at you for being late." I can't even imagine Bob Ross doing any of that. Apparently, when he retired from the Air Force, he allegedly vowed never to scream again. There are many paradoxical elements to Bob Ross. First of all, his vision and picture were set, but he allowed for happy accidents. He was type A meticulous, in contrast with his relaxing, laid-back mood. And he was a military person, yet he presented kind of like a hippie. On bobross.com, you can learn more, and you can buy painting supplies, books, DVDs, t-shirts, or even a Bob Ross Christmas tree ornament. You can take a class or look into becoming a Bob Ross certified painting instructor. If anyone does that, I want to know. Bob Ross's consistency and focus set his instruction apart. 35 years after its debut, his show continues to delight and relax audiences on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and YouTube. If you have not had the pleasure of watching his show, it's definitely worth checking out. Around this time in the 80s, another PBS phenomenon was in the making. Actor LeVar Burton of Roots and Star Trek: The Next Generation fame hosted Reading Rainbow on PBS from 1983 to 2009. This beloved show instilled a love of reading to a generation by exploring a featured children's book from a number of different perspectives, which included celebrity appearances, dramatic and informative segments such as visiting the book setting or learning about a related topic like the professions of the main characters. Reading Rainbow earned over 200 broadcast awards, including a Peabody and 26 Emmys. In the 2004 PBS study of video and television use among K-12 teachers, Reading Rainbow was the #1 most watched PBS program in classrooms nationwide. LeVar taught around the subject, adding content by introducing connected topics, providing various points of entry to the book. He had famous actors come and visit the show and participate and act out situations related to the story. This is called interdisciplinary learning. Interdisciplinary learning combines learning objectives and methods from more than one discipline to focus on a central theme, issue, or problem. In the case of Reading Rainbow, the central theme was a selected children's book. Interdisciplinary learning promotes the application of knowledge gained in one discipline to another and deepens the learning. This also allows for several points of entry to spark interest. And even with LeVar's acting skills, he didn't read the book out on the show. He was encouraging learners to read the books themselves. Self-directed learning can be misunderstood. It's not about working alone. Self-directed learning is about supplying a lot of resources to learners, and it involves the learner setting their own learning goals and often measuring their own performance. It is a learner-centered approach, but SDL achieves this by providing the learner with access to a plethora of materials, resources, and learning peers, and having their interests lead the way. SDL is connected to lifelong learning. So does anyone remember LeVar's tagline? But you don't have to take my word for it. A key part of social learning is self-directed learning is social learning. And that's providing learners with access to peers to support collaboration and dialogue. At the end of each of his shows, other children would come on and recommend books that they found that they wanted to recommend. So what does this look like in the workplace? LeVar in Reading Rainbow encouraged independent exploration by providing ample resources and materials. They facilitate collaboration, and in the workplace, this would be between work peers and experts. LeVar in Reading Rainbow would be designing blended learning solutions for higher ed, promoting collaborative sharing and information for knowledge workers and cross-functional dialogue. So let's start with storytelling. LeVar was a gifted actor and storyteller. Definitely incorporate storytelling into learning, and if possible, involve the learner with role playing. This can be part of scenario-based learning. It can happen in e-learns, instructor-led activities, breakout rooms, or coaching sessions. And offer a plethora of resources, online, print, and in human form. Part of self-directed learning is the collaboration with others in the field. And this includes building dialogue and lessons learned through tools like discussion boards and communities of practice. And while I admit this next one is not really commonplace in the workplace, I'm still recommending this. Take an interdisciplinary approach. How can you do that in the workplace? Anyone? Any ideas? I know you have ideas out there, but I'm going to give you one. The idea would be to have a problem that goes across different departments. The same problem, how it's handled or how it impacts different departments, seeing that the systemic approach. This would involve presenting this and making sure people understand what the roles of different departments are. It helps promote cross-functional understanding, and it keeps departments from becoming siloed. Well, who wouldn't want to be on an online class led by LeVar? How would that look? Well, first of all, you're going to want to be dramatic. That's something to borrow from him. LeVar was a professional actor, but you don't need to become a professional actor to use drama in your presentation. Be animated and convincing, act and use role play, draw people out. And promote social learning by getting groups to engage, use breakout sessions, or facilitate dialogue. And Reading Rainbow's secret sauce was variety. Be a tour guide for your learners. Take them places. Provide several points of entry to be interested in a subject. Invite guest speakers. Encourage peer conversation and share multimedia resources. So what happened to Reading Rainbow? Well, according to a 2009 interview between NPR and John Grant, who was in charge of the content at WNED Buffalo, Reading Rainbow's home station, the show's ending came around the time of No Child Left Behind, in 2001, the Bush administration. And there was a shift in focus from the desire to read to how to read. How to read is more things like phonics and the mechanics of reading. And that's not what Reading Rainbow is all about. In Grant's words, Reading Rainbow wasn't about teaching how to read, but why to read. It was more about fostering a love of reading and making lifelong learners. Teaching why is linked to self-directed learning, as we were saying, and self-directed learning enables lifelong learning. And according to the show's creators, the goal of the show was not to teach children to read, but to foster a lifelong love of reading. It all kind of connects. On June 20th, 2012, the Reading Rainbow app was released for the iPad, and within 36 hours, it became the #1 most downloaded educational app in the iTunes App Store. There are now interactive Reading Rainbow apps and video field trips for the iPad and Kindle. And of course, he has a podcast, www.levarburtonpodcast.com if you're interested. During the pandemic, LeVar Burton live streamed reading excerpts from books for listeners of all ages. He kicked it off with one of my kids' and my husband's favorite authors, Neil Gaiman. He told People magazine, "When I was venting about my frustrations about finding material, I got a tweet from Neil Gaiman saying, 'LeVar, you can use any of my stories that you want.' And that sort of opened the floodgates," Burton continued. "And so I decided, rather than trying to find one public domain story that fits the whole family, let me do readings aimed at different members of the household." It's not surprising that the social learning educator is now a social media master. But don't just take my word for it. I highly recommend you learn more about LeVar by watching his 6-episode biographical YouTube series. Just go to levarburton.com and you're going to click over here on this pink button and watch. And one more thing to note, and you should mark your calendars, because this summer LeVar Burton will be hosting a week of Jeopardy from July 26th to the 30th. It was actually one of his lifelong dreams to do this, so I'm excited for him. And as a fan of Jeopardy, I'm just excited because I love that show and it's going to be fun. Mark your calendars. So Reading Rainbow and LeVar Burton encouraged a generation to share lifelong love of learning. But now we move into the 90s and we get to change the channel. So far, we've been on PBS the whole time, but now we're in the 90s and I am throwing you a new talk show host from the graphic, not a talk show host, a TV show host. And this is now we're moving to the Animal Planet Network with Steve Irwin and the Crocodile Hunter. Yes. Any fans? I sure hope so.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Crikey.
Yeah. Steve Irwin was a famous Australian wildlife enthusiast and educator who became a household name after he and his wife, Terry, filmed the first episode of The Crocodile Hunter while on their honeymoon in 1992. Steve's passion for animals fueled the show, which ran from the Animal Planet from 1996 to 2007. His charisma and curiosity captured worldwide attention as he met animals in the wild, shared fun facts, and promoted wildlife conservation. Steve taught wildlife facts and demonstrated his animal handling techniques. But his real mission was to share his lifelong love of animals and foster conservation. In terms of the theoretical instructional design and workplace learning, I think of Bloom's domains of learning. A committee of colleges led by Bloom in 1956 identified 3 domains of educational activities: cognitive, which are mental skills; psychomotor, which are manual physical skills; and affective, which is a change in feelings or an emotional area, as such as known as attitudes. These make up knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and you've probably heard a lot about that. They're also called KSAs, and these are how HR builds job descriptions as well, and they're pretty important to workplace learning. In fact, workplace learning is pretty much categorized into these areas, with shaping attitudes and building awareness is probably one of the more difficult things to do. It's one of the trickier things to do, is to develop someone's attitude. And so my question is, which did Steve teach? Anyone want to make a guess as to what Steve taught? Did he teach knowledge, skills, or attitudes? Well, he taught them all. And so he shared, on the knowledge side, he shared lots of little fun animal facts. That's knowledge. He described how he was handling animals and would demonstrate what he was about to do. I am about to poke an alligator with a stick right now. And he didn't do that. These were skills, but what he really did that was remarkable, I feel, is promote wildlife appreciation and conservation, and that's an attitude. So cultivating attitudes in the workplace can be make or break for job success, and an invisible force for good or ill within this organization. And they are very tricky to cultivate. You very rarely have a shift in attitude after a single workshop. And while I don't know how many fun facts we can recall from Steve Irwin's shows, or if he really got people to handle animals in a safe way, he definitely raised money and awareness around conservancy. So I think it would be pretty cool to have Steve Irwin on an instructional design team for the workplace. It would be exciting to see how he could help us develop desired attitudes, which is a very tricky thing to do. So what lessons can we take from Steve in our own design? Well, first, let's take learners on an adventure. Let's include an element of risk. Steve took a great deal of risk. Risks are required for learning. You need to take risks to discover new things, and you should encourage your learners to do that safely. You should leave room for the elements of surprise or the unknown, which makes learning memorable. Steve Irwin and his father, Bob, discovered a new kind of turtle while on a crocodile catching trip in 1990. You need to take risks in order to discover new things. Another thing we can learn from Steve is that you want to share fun facts throughout the learning. It just keeps interest. And you want to shape attitudes over time. Shifts in thinking and habits do not happen immediately. You need to cultivate them like a fine wine. It helps to be patient and take a long-term view when you're trying to develop new attitudes. In my blog post, I speak of 2 ideas that I think are at play here and helped Steve Irwin's success. These are not instructional design concepts strictly. They are theories connected to human behavior, but I do like to draw upon them a lot. Robert Zajonc is responsible for the near exposure effect, which postulates that just being exposed to something and having familiarity helps you gain affinity towards it. The idea is often used in marketing, really, more than instructional design, but it helps desire or cultivate product and brand loyalty. It can be important in instructional design too, though, in terms of supporting the habits and attitudes you're hoping to develop. Another powerful idea is nudge theory, which was formalized by Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economists Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. It's around how people make decisions that lead to habits, things we're trying to encourage in the workplace. So if we had, let's say, a safety program in the workplace, we want to encourage attitudes around safety. Ironically, I think Steve Irwin would be very helpful there. He took a lot of risks, but he knows how to develop attitudes. Unfortunately, he died in 2006 after being pierced in the chest by a stingray while filming in the Great Barrier Reef. So we want to be careful with some of the risks. But again, all the great things he did were because he took risks. So what does it look like to facilitate like Steve Irwin? Well, take risks. Imagine him on a Zoom. He's not afraid. He calls on people directly. He's probably bringing Zoom into the field using a selfie stick and showing people the ropes. Maybe like literally there might be ropes. He is also not afraid to use new technologies. He shares his screen without needing to prepare a lot. He's not as meticulous as Bob Ross, but somehow it all works out. So be spontaneous and take risks. Try something in front of your participants when you aren't really sure how it's going to work out. Steve Irwin drew people in with his excitement and his risk-taking, which at times is actually kind of unsettling. While potentially dangerous stunts with animals held his audience's attention, I am not recommending you taunt alligators to gain learner engagement. But I am recommending that you be passionate. Steve shares his passion with this audience around the subject, and it's infectious. Bring your enthusiasm and passion for the topic. Be excited by and responsive to the learning event. And use the word crikey. No, not really. Don't use the word crikey. Use your own word and be authentic. Recall that he rose to fame after filming his first episode on his honeymoon. He was the real deal, and people knew that, and they related to that. He got his whole family involved with the show. His whole life was wildlife conservancy, and he was teaching who he was. There was no act there. If anyone has any questions or qualms about Steve Irwin as an educational giant, it should be noticed that before his death, he was named adjunct professor at the University of Queensland School of Integrative Biology. He was awarded the adjunct professorship posthumously. His quote, "I consider myself a wildlife warrior. My mission is to save the world's endangered species." Irwin founded the Steve Irwin Conservation Foundation, International Crocodile Rescue, and the Lynn Irwin Memorial Fund named after his mother. He urged people to be mindful in their tourism and educated people about making responsible purchases that did not endanger species. To learn more about Steve Irwin, you can visit his family's website. They run the zoo. They still run the zoo. And you'll find out that he had a huge impact on wildlife and our attitudes around it. No one could deny Steve Irwin's passion or commitment to wildlife. And if you can bring this enthusiasm and excitement to your instruction, you will no doubt engage your learners. So we have covered 4 legendary teachers and their instructional methods, and I'm wondering if anyone finds themselves identifying with any of these teachers. I have a little quiz for you. We want to take a moment to find out who your muse might be or whom you might want to channel in more. So, a couple of questions. First of all, are you more adventurous or are you more planned? So if you are more adventurous, you should give yourself a point for Steve Irwin. And if you're more planned, you should give yourself a point for Bob. And how do you let the learner chart their own course? Well, if you supply lots of materials and support peer collaboration, give yourself a point for LeVar. And if you ask open questions and ask learners to connect their learning to prior experiences, give yourself a Mr. Rogers point. Now I want you to remember who you just gave yourself a point as we move into the next question. Do you teach procedural or more conceptual content? So if you're teaching procedural, give yourself a Bob point. And if you're teaching more conceptual content, go with who you just chose before. Give yourself another Mr. Rogers or LeVar point. And are you primarily imparting knowledge, skills, or attitudes? Well, if you are promoting knowledge, give yourself a LeVar point. Skills, give yourself a Bob Ross point. Attitude, give yourself a Steve Irwin point. And if you are actually making transformational change in your learner, developing critical thinking or coping skills, give yourself a Mr. Rogers point. Finally, take a moment and think about what words best describe you. Are you dramatic, like LeVar? Are you prepared like Bob Ross? Are you passionate like Steve Irwin? Or are you empathetic like Mr. Rogers? So I hope you've identified a TV show host mentor and inspired by the remote instructors of yore. I'm hoping you'll also start to see ID inspiration in places you didn't necessarily expect to see it. I know I find inspiration in many, many places like BuzzFeed, Twitter, and even modern day TV all the time. Believe it or not, the reality TV shows like Wife Swap and Undercover Boss are inspiring my next potential blog post. And some concluding thoughts before we go on. In wealthy countries, the debates over how to deliver education remotely have focused on how to make online classes engaging and interactive. But many of the world's students and millions in affluent nations who do not have access to broadband connections or computers rely on TV, believe it or not. In fact, owing to the pandemic, during the past year, in many areas where they don't have the infrastructure to support broadband internet access or real-time remote schooling using tools like Zoom, places like Peru, Tanzania, and even parts of the United States, like New Jersey, developed primary and secondary lessons that were delivered over television to millions of students who would otherwise had no formal daily curriculum. Both TV and internet access are powerful tools of learning. They need to continue to provide quality TV-based education. The need to provide quality TV education and bandwidth and internet access for all cannot be understated. This speaks to the need for funding for both educational public broadcasting as well as support for initiatives like Broadband for All, a bill being put forward by the Biden administration. The bottom line is that access to broadband is as vital to access to electricity. With these goals in mind, I want to conclude with an excerpt from Mr. Rogers' appeal to Congress to secure funding for public broadcasting for his show. I'm hoping, can you hear?
Senator Pastore, this is a philosophical statement and would take about 10 minutes to read, so I'll not do that. One of the first things that a child learns in a healthy family is trust. And I trust what you have said that you will read this. It's very important to me. I care deeply about children. My first children...
Will it make you happy if you read it?
I'd just like to talk about it, if it's all right.
Sir. Okay.
My first children's program was on WQED 15 years ago, and its budget was $30. Now, with the help of the Sears Roebuck Foundation and National Educational Television, as well as all of the affiliated stations, each station pays to show our program. It's a unique kind of funding in educational television. With this help, now our program has a budget of $6,000. It may sound like quite a difference, but $6,000 pays for less than 2 minutes of cartoons, 2 minutes of animated, what I sometimes say, bombardment. I'm very much concerned, as I know you are, about what's being delivered to our children in this country. And I've worked in the field of child development for 6 years now, trying to understand the inner needs of children. we deal with such things as the inner drama of childhood. We don't have to bop somebody over the head to make him, to make drama on the screen. We deal with such things as getting a haircut, or the feelings about brothers and sisters, and the kind of anger that arises in simple family situations. And we speak to it constructively.
How long a program is it?
It's a half hour every day. Most channels schedule it in the noontime as well as in the evening. WETA here has scheduled it in the late afternoon.
Could we get a copy of this so that we can see it? Maybe not today, but I'd like to see the program.
I'd like very much for you
I'd
to
like
see.
to see the program itself, or any one of them, you see.
Oh, sorry about that little, I'm gonna pause now because I know we're running low on time. But I wanted to I just seeing him and the way he communicates is so powerful in and of itself, and the commitment he had to the children who watched his show and their emotional and mental health. So I just wanted to share that. And if you want to see the whole clip, you can just Google Mr. Rogers Goes to Washington and see it. I also just want to thank you all for letting me share my thoughts. And I don't know if we've got time for questions, but I'm up for it if we do. And I appreciate your attention.
Yeah, we definitely have time for questions.
Great.
And if you do need to go away quickly at 2:30 Eastern, we understand and we won't be at all insulted. But just we want to thank you for coming. And we got started a little bit late, so I think it's reasonable that we run over a little bit. And I want to remind everybody we have given you microphone rights. So if you have a mic, feel free to speak right up. We love to hear your voices. Or if you're shy and want to type your question into the chat, let us know. Just go ahead. And this always happens. Thank you, Stacy, for your feedback. Stacy says, thank you. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Cindy Powell.
So do you think that the four TV show hosts you highlighted meant to do what they did?
I think they each had their own mission. I think each of the people had a different sort of mission. And one could say that one of Bob's missions was to sell paint, actually. So it's a different mission. But the commitment of Fred Rogers to childhood mental health and listening, even to other humans, not just children. I actually think he viewed us all as gigantic children. And so, anyone who ever spoke to him or had that experience has really remarked how they've never really felt quite so heard. So I think that he had just a special sauce as being a human being. And I think that he had a mission in his life that he was aware of. I think Steve Irwin's passion, he had a mission about conservancy. I think LeVar and the creators of Reader Rainbow wanted to develop lifelong readers, people who love to read. And I do think that Bob Ross did want to bring literally the joy of painting to people. So I think they all had a mission. And I think that passion is what fueled their ability to share it with others. I don't know if that answers your question really, but did I answer?
Yes. I was trying to find the mute button.
Oh, okay.
I'm always on mute because dogs.
Yes, I have a dog too.
Yep.
Anybody else? Other questions? I'm used to speaking with people. I'm used to having more of a dialogue online. So I welcome questions.
So which one of the four do you identify with?
Oh, what a great question. Well, I wish I could relate more to Mr. Rogers. I aspire to be like Mr. Rogers, especially as a parent. I would love to have the listening capability. I don't have his listening capabilities, but I dream of being him. I think in terms of instruction, I probably most relate to maybe LeVar in a way because of the variety and I guess I think trying to spark the interest, and maybe my style might match his a little bit more. Thanks for the question.
You're welcome. Thanks for a great answer and great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you for wonderful presentation. I'm a huge Mr. Rogers fan too, and all these men are kind of heroes to me as well. So I love hearing about how we can bring that in to our practice. So I think right now is a really great time to be in technical communication and also just user experience and usability in this whole field, because we're kind of in this period where we're transitioning out of a lot of pitches and sales and different types of writing into delivering content that is valuable to our users. And I think these men are definitely, as you've illustrated, great examples for us to help guide us in creating our content. How exactly do you use these types of practices, and how do you balance it between trying to deliver, authentic, true content to your users, and then actually giving the message of whatever they have to learn? Because I think there's a bit of a balance there, and I wonder how exactly you approach that.
Thanks for the question. I tried to tease out the specific skills that I think are realistic to be able to bring to a workplace instructional design, like chunking, learner-centered approach, lots of questions, letting somebody connect to their prior knowledge, for instance, as we move through the sort of concepts. I think depending on the type of content and the type of learners, different aspects of these will become more relevant. So I think I kind of like let the content and the learner and the situation drive that decision. So if it's a attitude we're trying to develop, I try to take a lot of different pieces from those different instructors and just apply them to the situation at hand. If it was a procedural type of like a just-in-time training, I really will think about chunking things and making them so that they could be updated easily. I think about doing that efficiently and think about Bob Ross, or I think about the types of skills that they employed depending on the situation. Does that answer the question, or did I miss the balance part? I think
yes, it's one of those questions that's like too kind of big to encapsulate in this in a minute anyway. But whatever you had to offer is great.
I appreciate. I think the balance part is tricky. I think it's hard to answer that. I think I stay pretty laser focused on learning objectives when I'm designing. I really try to see how am I going to get the learner to that place. So that really is the balance for me. Whatever it takes to get the learner to the objective, and those are the tools I think that I draw upon. So thanks. I see some people popping off. Some people are saying bye. Or do I have any more questions? I'm happy to answer any if there are anybody out there.
Oh, I'll bring something up. My name is Emma Zinn, and I've been
Emma.
Helping people of all ages to learn how to read English and look at letters and words, and basically almost self-teach themselves phonics. There's some help on the side. But anyway, I've created a pledge for the learners and a pledge for the teachers, or helpers, so that they have a lot of love and care and respect for each other as they do this. And so I was just wondering, does that fall under Irwin?
I think it falls under, but I mean that sounds like the empathy you're bringing is a Fred Rogers level of empathy. Okay. But I do think that the attitude, you're cultivating an attitude. So I think you're probably role modeling that a lot, and you're probably patient and letting it develop over time. And those are all the cultivating that exposure would be Steve Irwin in my book. But
Okay, so it would be the exposure. Do you think that would be a thing to, like, I think that it should be something presented from the start because, well, I'm basically contradicting a lot of what was said about phonics when you were mentioning social learning. And so
no, not at all. I disagree. I think you're not contradicting. There's still a need for that. It's just not what Reading Rainbow was trying to do.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. The attitude is one of love when you bother to take the time to do the phonics. So you're suggesting that, like, in that attitude, maybe I present bits of that slowly, or should I present at the end of, I'm planning a bunch of YouTube videos to go
Neat.
along with
I think you're on the right track of doing it early. Setting a code of conduct, I believe, is something very important to establish early on in a classroom, especially with cohorts. But even not with cohorts, when you have expectations, even for a very short online presentation, let's say this was a more interactive event we were having. I would have you, if you were in one of my classes, I might say, I don't want people hiding their screens. If you have a medical reason or a reason why you need to hide your screen, that would be one thing. But I might say, I want to see your face. And that might be my code of conduct. And that would be something I would establish early on. When you have a group of cohorts, especially children, you want to reinforce that code of conduct and be patient and build the attitudes over time, like Steve Irwin, by exposing them to the proper behavior or the desired, let's call it the desired behavior, and building in supports through using things like nudge and the mere exposure effect. And how you might do that is by, let's say you're trying to promote kindness, you might have a kind act every day that gets acknowledged. Or when someone comes in the door, there might be something kind that they're expected to do, or something like that, where it's reinforced. And you have nudging. The nudge theory is giving people, setting them up for success by making them have good decisions. And you could do that throughout as well. You could nudge them into kindness with the classroom supports. Those are just some ideas.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds like you're on the right track and know exactly what to do.
Yeah, I'm figuring it out, it just it helps to get to know the audience as well.
Yeah. Well, good luck with it too.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and I like how you've talked about both you and the woman who just spoke up. It is so much about empathy and whether or not we care about, we're not just, nobody's going to get filthy rich doing instructional design and learning, right? We're in here because we care about our audience and we care about the way things go. And there is so much excitement when I figure out that someone has caught on, that they have got it. That is so exciting. And I love the way that you were able to show these 4 instructors, and they aren't getting that immediate feedback. They're going to get that feedback much later. And I just admire the courage to be able to do that. You were talking about, Catherine, you were talking about, you're very focused on whether or not your learners are catching on. And that is so difficult to do if you're not getting any feedback. And so I just really admire the things that we can learn from the instructors that are, they may read about it later. They may get letters from fans. They may get complaint letters, but they're just having to believe that this is working. Yeah. And then it's going to work.
I agree. I feel like, like I said, I'm very used to having even online now, I have very interactive sessions where I speak with people, and giving a presentation like this is probably as close as I have come to feeling the feeling of a TV experience, where you're just sharing or speaking and waiting for that. You don't have that immediate response. The most immediate response is when you're in front of people and you can actually just look at them and make eye contact in the real way. And there's nothing that beats that. But at the same time, you're right. It's a almost like an act of faith in some ways to present in a less interactive way. You have to kind of just trust. Hello, I see somebody has Hi, thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it is 40 after the hour. So we've had a really good hour. I want to extend an invitation for you all to go to Wecksell.org because clearly Catherine has a lot more to say and invites us to engage with her. I think it's a time in Zoom land where we can go to the reactions and everybody hit the applause button.
Thank you.
And my mic's on, so I'll give you a clap.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm going to stop the recording. I'm not going to end the interactivity, but I am going to stop the recording.